Hello and welcome to Ofcom Training, a new update for February 2025. Hope you're well. The Ofcom code is the code which we must abide by. It's not the same for online-only radio stations, but because we're on DAB, we have an Ofcom license, and therefore we have to abide by their code. If we slip up, we can get into trouble, which can result in a fine. It could result in our license being revoked. It could definitely result in you being fired. So here we go with a reminder of the code. And I know you've seen this before, but there's a new section that I want you to pay attention to, which is coming up in just a minute. Paul Chandler, the late, great Paul Chandler, was a brilliant broadcaster, radio guy, and certainly was an expert when it came to Ofcom and what you could or couldn't do. And he always used to say, it's common sense. If in doubt, don't put it out. And it is common sense, and hopefully you'll see that as we go through this. Going to cover competitions, court cases, slander, elections, protecting children, and a little bit at the end about social media, which is now more important than ever, because as you've seen after the Southport atrocity, social media posts can actually get you put in prison these days. So, competitions. Now, I'm only going to cover this in a small way because it's our job, basically, to make sure we get things right from our end when it comes to competitions. But one thing to stress is that you can't do a competition on air unless it's been approved before it goes out by either me or by Steve Weaver or by someone in management. So if you've got tickets for your mate's gig down the dot road, you can't just on your show one night say, do you want to win a pair of tickets? Give me a call. It's got to be approved. And the reason it has to be approved is that there's certain compliance issues that we have to go through when we do competitions. For instance, this is a recent read that we did for a competition giving away tickets for the Royal Court. It was the Play of the Peace Flower. We were giving away the tickets, and this is the read. And you'll see as I go through this just how many compliance issues there are here that we had to adhere to. So the Royal Court Theatre are proud to present The Peace Flower, a play about love in the 80s, which is a tender and funny and great night out. It also features a guest appearance by our very own Pete Price. Okay, that's the read. Fine. Now here's a chance for you to win a pair of tickets. The show runs until March the 8th. For your chance to win, text 60030. Start the message with decades. So that's the first thing you have to do, because we want to make sure the message goes to the right radio station. And then type get me in, which means that if you've typed that, we know that you've entered the competition. We must also say that texts are charged at your standard rate, because to text us on that number, it will cost money. It's not free. But we're also pointing out that you can enter for free via the in-demand app. So we're giving them a free port of entry there, okay? You also need to give a time when the entries are going to close. So, for instance, you might say the entries will close at 3:20, and you need to remind the listener not to enter if they're on listen again, because obviously that won't qualify. And then we need to point out that the winner will be chosen at random and contacted by a member of our team. And you also need to say the terms and conditions are available on our website. Now, they are standard terms and conditions, and for certain competitions, we may have specific terms and conditions, but we will do this for you. So if there is a giveaway, you'll be told exactly how the mechanic's going to work. You'll be told exactly what you need to say on air so that you can remain compliant. Okay. Court cases. The best rule of thought here is if there's a court case ongoing or about to start, you do not comment on it whatsoever. It's only going to cause trouble, and at the very worst can cause contempt of court. So if you remember some recent cases with some pretty horrible murders, people who thought they knew who the suspect was. It was being widely circulated on social media. If you'd have gone on the radio and mentioned a name of a suspect before they'd gone to court, or even before they were charged, then that would cause us serious problems. The example of Mark Kay at Rock FM, the Harold Shipman trial was going on at the time at Preston Crown Court. The jury had been discharged for the day, and they're on the way back to the hotel in the minibus, and the minibus driver is playing Mark Kay's drive time show on Rock FM on the speakers for the whole bus to hear. At one point, Mark Kay says, "It's day 39 of the Harold Shipman trial," to which his co-host shouts in the background, "Guilty, guilty, we all know he's guilty." And Mark Kay confirms this and says, yeah, of course he's guilty. He should be hung, drawn and quartered for what he's done. The jury heard this, and someone reported it to the judge. The next morning, Michelle Sorrell, the MD of Rock FM, and Mark Kay himself are up in court in front of the judge, who is going to throw them in prison for contempt of court. This could have meant that the whole case was declared a mistrial, and he could have got off. One of the worst serial killers in the UK could have got off because of what went on Rock FM. In the end, they didn't go to jail. The trial continued, but it was only because they were able to represent what they'd done to mitigate the situation. So Mark Kay and the co-host had been suspended. They'd issued instant apologies on air. So they'd taken all of the content off the internet, so that there was no way of referencing it. And they profusely apologized to the judge, and that's how they got away with it. But it was touch and go for a while on that one. So slander. Slander and libel. Libel's normally the written word, so it's newspapers that normally get into trouble for libel cases. Slander is the spoken word, but basically they're both the same. Slander, libel, defamation. This is when you ruin someone's character or you tell lies about them that can't be proven, and you damage them. Obviously, the Wagatha Christie case is one that comes to mind. Strongly libelous, of course, and Colleen Rooney was able to win the case in the end. To damage someone's reputation by making a false spoken statement about them, that is basically defamation. So, for instance, if you slagged off a company like McDonald's, they actually employ people to listen to radio stations to catch people in this very act so they can take them to court. But if you were to slag them off by saying something wasn't true, then you'd be up in court, probably charged with some form of defamation, libel, or slander. Again, if you were to name someone in the community and damage their reputation by making a false statement about them, again, you could be sued for that, and so could the radio station for allowing it to go out. So steer clear of slagging anyone off, basically. Repeating is no defense. So if you read something in a newspaper and that turns out not to be true, and that newspaper is sued for libel because of it, and you've repeated it on your radio show, then you are just as guilty as the newspaper. So repeating is no defense. You can't say, well, I saw it in the Daily Mirror, so I assumed it must be correct. No, never assume anything you read online or in the newspapers especially. Often it's not true, especially now on X. There's some real nasty stuff going around on there. If you repeat it, it can get you into bags and bags of trouble. IRN Showbiz. This is a DAB station in Salisbury. They put out an IRN Showbiz bulletin. They were automatically sent these bulletins that landed in their playout system, and then they do them 2 or 3 times a day. And the Showbiz bulletin in question was that the guy who plays, Barry Humphries, who plays Dame Edna Everage, had been admitted to hospital. There was a technical malfunction, and the wrong Showbiz bulletin had been delivered. So the bulletin that played out was actually a bulletin intended for a few days before. In fact, when the bulletin played out, Barry Humphries had sadly died. A listener complained because they said it was inaccurate information. IRN put their hands up and said, yeah, it was our problem. It was our technical issue. We shouldn't have sent the bulletin. But it was still the DAB station who aired it in Salisbury that ultimately got into trouble with Ofcom. So bear that in mind too. Elections. We had a big general election last year. We're not expecting a general election anytime soon. Well, you never know. We could be expecting some by-elections soon, and the general rule is not to comment on elections at all. In fact, you're not allowed to comment on elections once a general election has been declared, but the same for local elections, by the way. So if you went on and said that you love Labour and you want Labour to win because you think Keir Starmer is an absolute genius, then that gets you into trouble because you are being biased towards one party or another. For instance, if you hate Nigel Farage and Reform, you might go on and slag him off. That's going to get you into trouble as well. Causing offence. Ofcom are normally most worried about the harming of children, which we'll come to later, and causing offence in general. So if you say something on the radio that would generally cause offence, then that's when they'll sit up and take note. Ofcom need to have a complaint made against the station or you for them to investigate, but every complaint will be investigated, no matter how large or small. Even if they go back to the person complaining and saying, listen, we don't really think you've got a case there, we're not going to take it any further, or they start investigating and come back and say to the station, right, we need a written explanation of what's gone on here, and I'll give you some get out of jail cards in just a little while. Humiliation is one of the big ones. Bam Bam on Kiss FM in London used to do telephone wind-up calls. One of the reasons we don't do them on radio anymore. This particular call received loads of complaints, and it generated one of the record Ofcom fines. He had a guy on the phone who was desperately looking for employment, and Bam Bam basically ripped this guy apart by saying he was useless, by saying no one would employ him, even at one point saying, I bet you've got bad breath. It was a pretty uncomfortable listen, and it generated complaints. It was the second time Bam Bam had gone up in front of Ofcom, and this time they'd had enough. The fine that was issued to Kiss FM in London was £250,000, and Bam Bam was fired and has only recently, this is about 20 years ago, only recently starting to recover his radio career. Everyone's favourite bit now, words that get you fired. This is a list that is published by Ofcom of offensive words that they consider not suitable for airing. A reminder, TV has a watershed at 9 p.m. Radio never has a watershed. The mild ones are here on screen. If you were to say one of these, Ofcom might frown a bit, but it's almost certainly not going to get you fired. But why would you want to say any of these words, really? Because, you can see that they will cause offence. The medium ones definitely don't go anywhere near these. The strong ones, very funny. You'd never use them. If you did, well, quite frankly, you'd be a dickhead. And now on to the three words that almost certainly would get you fined and would almost certainly result in Ofcom fining the radio station. Okay. Like I say, it's common sense. You wouldn't use those words on the radio because you know they would cause offence. Ofcom are most interested in protecting children. They take a massive dim view of anything, any content that would cause harm or offence to children, and there are specific times that they pay most attention to. And that's breakfast and drive time, because it's when children are most likely to be listening, in the car with mum or dad on the way to or on the way back from school. So we need to be mindful of this all of the time, but especially at breakfast and drive. Radio City Breakfast Show, this was a while back, but they came out of the news bulletin was a story about Pamela Anderson, I think, and the co-host shouted MILF. And the host of the show went, you can't say that. And she went, yeah, I can. She's a MILF. Oh, she's the biggest MILF I've ever seen in my life. What an absolute MILF. Then they carried on. Obviously, breakfast time, kid in the car, 7-year-old, turns to mum and says, Mum, what's a MILF? Mum had to skirt round the issue and then thought it was appropriate to complain to Ofcom because it had caused her a great deal of embarrassment and offence. Ofcom investigated and gave Radio City a slap on the wrist. The newsreader was reprimanded. The presenter was reprimanded. And I know because that presenter was me. Obit, the king is dead. Coming towards the end of our little presentation now, so please stick with us. There are certain procedures we have to do if a member of the royal family dies. The king's been ill recently. Obviously, he's getting on a bit. We saw this with the Queen. We do our obit procedure slightly different to other radio stations, but we will still have to observe the procedure. There should be an obit guide in the studio. If you get the official word that a member of the royal household on the list of obit procedures has passed away, you must do certain things. One of them is dropping the adverts. One of them is dropping music down to a slow tempo. All very, respectful. That's basically it. But if it happens, a manager should be able to inform you of what to do, for how long the OBIT procedure is going to last, and any other details you need. And finally, 70% of Ofcom complaints now involve things around social media. Now, your own social media is your own social media, but just beware if you post things that cause controversy or offense on your own social media. I'm talking about if you posted something that was racist or homophobic, and your social media had on the profile that you worked at In Demand Radio, then you would also bring the station into disrepute. We saw after the Southport murders last year that people were posting things on social media that actually got them thrown into prison. So it's becoming much more serious than it used to be. Slagging people off and hiding behind a keyboard is something that the government and Ofcom are very keen on cracking down on. So obviously, the radio station social media, we have to be very careful of what we put out in terms of videos and pictures and that sort of thing. But on your own social media, just be aware of stuff that could get you into trouble.